What's going on, people? What's going on, everybody? This is We Are Reading. My name is Eli Wananda, and welcome to We Are Reading. What's We Are Reading? I must make sure to tell people what this thing is at the beginning. We Are Reading is a series of live streams that I do every Saturday, usually at this time, every Saturday evening. I missed last week, but every Saturday I've been doing this since the start of 2023. We do a discussion of any books and papers and articles. Maybe at some point we'll start doing more different types of literature, maybe even different types of art, like films and things like that, perhaps. I don't know. But books and content on the lines of which I think are conducive for us as Black people, as African people. We have done so far one whole full book, which was called The Invention of Women by a Yoruba Nigerian scholar called Oyeronke Oyewumi. That was a really good book, all about gender and how the concept of gender that the Yoruba people had prior to colonialism was very different to the concept of gender which we have now, based on the colonial experience and the importation of Western ideas of gender and all that kind of stuff. So that was really good. And then the book that we're doing currently is called Yurugu. And this is the book right here, Yurugu by Mama Marimba Ani. I always call her Mama Marimba Ani because, as a term of respect, because she is like an auntie, frankly, and she's a warrior scholar, ancestor in waiting, you could say. She's earned her stripes as an ancestor due to the work that she's done for our people. But Mama Marimba Ani has written this book here, which is called Yurugu, and the subtitle there is An African-Centered Critique of European Cultural Thought and Behavior. And it's we're now on chapter 10 in this book, and that means that we're up to page 511. So it's the penultimate chapter of Yurugu we're dealing with at the moment. And this is what we're going to talk about forthwith in this video today. We've got this stream on Yurugu, then we've got next week's stream, which will be the conclusion of Yurugu, and the conclusion is interestingly titled Yurugu, the Incomplete Being, and I presume that chapter is really going to kind of bring it all together to explain what this term Yurugu really means and how all the stuff we've read in the book already kind of pieces together in this conception of the asili of European cultural thought. The asili meaning the seed, the ideological seed of the culture. So we've got two more today and next week, and then on June the 24th, I think, we shall do a stream on a book called Kindezi, which is all about I think it's called the African Art of Child Care, or the African Art of Babysitting, actually. But don't be fooled by that name. The introduction of that book, just to give you a little idea, the introduction of Kindezi is by Mama Marimba Ani, and Mama Marimba Ani has a lot of love to share, or has a lot. It speaks about that book in glowing terms, let's just say. So that will be the next one. But for now, we're gonna do chapter 10 of Yurugu. So before we start the video, just make sure, please, that you like the video, share the video, please, if you would. Let your contacts know, let your peeps know. Quick share on Facebook, quick share on YouTube, on Twitter, YouTube, whatever it might be. Let people know that you're there, that you're here, hapa, and that'll be appreciated as well. And then also, if you haven't already, just do sign up at eliwananda.substack.com. That's the way that you can join my mailing list. And also you can support as well financially if you want to on that channel as well. All of the live streams go on to Substack in full, whereas the ones on YouTube will be edited at some point. All right. So let's get started with chapter 10 of Yurugu. And the subtitle of the subtitle of this chapter is the title is Universalism, and the subtitle is the Syntax of Cultural Imperialism. Is there chapter 10, as you can see there, chapter 10, Universalism, the Syntax of Cultural Imperialism. Now, I will say from the off that you can definitely tell that we're getting to the end of the book now when you read this chapter, because there probably isn't much that's introduced in this chapter that is new, i.e. most of the stuff that she talks about in this chapter is somewhat, she's already trailed it or teased it in the earlier chapters of the book. So it's kind of more of a kind of bringing together some of these ideas. But the main purpose of this chapter is basically, so in the last chapter, chapter 9 was all about the European concept of progress. And this Marimba Ani starts chapter 10 by saying that, this concept of progress works greatly for Europeans. Why does it work? Because so if you remember, the idea of progress in the European asili, the European Utumawazo in particular, this concept of progress is an endless concept. There's no purpose to the progress except to just keep progressing. And I talked last week, I brought out about how this really fits in particularly with capitalism, where it's just growth, and change for the sake of change. And the purpose of that, the benefit of that idea of progress is that it suits the European ultima rojo, which is the energetic drive to just expand, which is based on the Platonic thought and all that, the ideas of Plato, subject, object. Anyway, we talked about the idea of progress. Mama Marimba Ani, tells us all about it, and she touches on it here as well, right at the start of chapter 10. She says that it works for Europeans to facilitate their expansionism, where they go out and they have to expand and take over and dominate and destroy others and other people and nature and whatnot. But it also works on the rest of us who accept the validity of the idea of progress and also the implications of the idea of progress. And this acceptance, she argues, is only the way that the fact that we accept this idea of progress is what she's talking about in this chapter now. This is universalism, the idea, and she breaks it. She talks about it on page 510. Right at the end of the previous chapter, she says this: the reality is that given the European asili, the ideology of progress is a powerful ideological construct. It works, but it works for Europeans. It brings them power. It justifies their existence as European and provides momentum and direction for their cultural lives and group behavior. It helps them to shape the world in their image. The ideology of progress not only functions for Europeans, but part of its success lies in its ability to seduce the rest of us so that we validate our own oppression. We accept its universal applicability, not realizing that its success as an ideology of imperialism, i.e. the success of the idea of progress as an ideology of imperialism, is totally dependent on the syntax of universalism. If we can reject the validity of that syntax, then we can rob it of its power as a tool of European imperialism. And then I like this sentence: the ideology of progress is a European cultural political tour de force. The syntax of universalism is its handmaiden. So that kind of leads us up to why we're talking about universalism in this chapter. Peace, everyone who's joined us already. Peace to you. Everything is politics. Good evening. Everything is politics. Good evening, Famo. Nice to see you on board. Hope you're having a siku unjema wherever you are. Good day wherever you are, and everyone else as well. When you join, feel free to holler and let us know you're in the chat as well. So in this chapter, Marimba Ani is talking about universalism, and interestingly, she says that her main emphasis here is going to be talking about universalism as it is deployed or used not by right-wing people particularly, and not by the in-your-face racists and anti-black purveyors and stuff like that. She says her main emphasis is going to be on social theory and on liberals, and she argues that the way that these liberals and sociologists and so forth, the way that they use this universalism is perhaps the most subtle and ideologically effective manifestations of European cultural imperialism. And so the question is, well, why is that? Why would you say that the universalism as applied by liberals, European liberals, and in particular European social theorists, why would that be the most effective manifestation of European cultural imperialism? Because you'd think that the most effective example of cultural imperialism would be something like open, naked acts of aggression against Africans and against non-Europeans. You'd think Hitler or something, or fascism. You'd think that, maybe you might think, well, surely that's the most effective manifestation of cultural imperialism. And she says, no, actually, it's the liberals. And why? She says, it's because of how the liberal use of the syntax of imperialism defangs our resistance movement. So she says on page 512, she says this: by camouflaging European political interest as universal human goals, Europeans disarm the victims of their imperialism. Culturally inspired flames of resistance to European aggression are extinguished by a sea of universalist rhetoric. And she says, for example, this is a key one. She gives an example sentence. Quote, we are seeking the good of humankind while you are acting merely to further the ends of a narrowly defined nationalism. The circle is indeed, sorry. She says, the circle is indeed a vicious one, for the more successfully European culture is imposed on majority cultures, the more convincing becomes the rhetoric, until we, first world intellectuals who are European trained, struggle also to represent not our own, but the universal humanitarian interest, which of course has already been defined in terms of European value. We find it unintelligent, quote unquote, to talk in terms of race. And ain't that the truth? Like, the average person I can think of who might consider themselves to be left-leaning, liberal, anti-racist and whatnot, the average person, even the average African black person who would hear this stream right now would say, "What this all feels a little bit. Why are you attacking European thought? Surely we should be here to just bring people." I get people saying this, like, we should be bringing people together, not dividing everyone. They say stuff like that. Or I get that sort of comment fairly often. And Marimba Ani is pointing out here that this, can't we all just get along? It's all about human progress and human rights and humanity and all these sorts of things. That stuff, if you buy into this idea that those ideas, those concepts are actual universal concepts, human rights, child rights, for example, very popular in the development circles, child rights and so forth. If you take that on board and think that actually, these are just universal human things, then you've already been programmed, and you've been, you've taken the bait, let's just say. And you might think that you're being progressive and all that sort of stuff, anti-racist or whatever, but you're not. And I'd say an example of this is Marxism. I may have talked about this before in a previous stream, but Marxists love to often, not all Marxists, but a lot of the Marxists I've come across, and I've done a tiny little bit of organizing with one or two socialist parties here in the UK. There's a socialist party, and then there's a socialist workers' party, are the two probably main ones. And I've done a little bit of work with them both, tiny bit of work. And I recall bringing up, well, what about race? Do you know what I mean? What about black issues? And they'll be like, well, I mean, yes, but the best way to combat racism, the best way to combat these issues that you're bringing up is to deal with the class issue. Because if you deal with the class, then that will solve all the other issues, and it's that kind of like, your issues, they say to us, your issues are important, Mr. Black person. Sure, this is important. However, you need to sit down, wait your turn, because the more important issues are class. We need to deal with class warfare, and we need to be united in dealing with class warfare. Almost like once the struggle's finished, then we can sit down and like deal with these race issues. And this is something that Frank Wilderson talks about a fair bit. Frank Wilderson he's the person who basically made popular this idea of Afro-pessimism. And I've said it before as well. I think that this book here, Yurugu, I think you'd see Yurugu as an important precursor to some of the things that Afro-pessimists say. But he talks a lot about this whole idea of wait your turn. Do you know what I mean? There's more important things to deal with. Don't talk about race. Don't bring in race issues and so on and so forth. But when Marimba Ani is talking about universalism, she's actually going a little bit deeper than just that kind of obvious example of black issues being pushed aside or race being pushed aside as a thing. And she gives an example on page 512 to talk about this. So she gives an example of, well, I'll read it. 512. She says, an example of how this works, i.e. this universalism, an example of how this works can be demonstrated by a common contemporary use of the European value dichotomy of abstract, which is good, and concrete, which is bad. African, that is black children, it is said, are severely handicapped in that they tend to think only in concrete terms and are generally unable to think abstractly. An unfortunate reaction among black people, people of African descent. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, hay fever's just kicking this weekend. An unfortunate reaction among people of African descent is to seek to prove that black children can think just as abstractly as white children, but they are jumping the gun, for the following questions have not been asked. What does it mean to think abstractly? What value does it have if, in fact, people do think abstractly? What does it mean in terms of the interest of the white society? When the charge is made, one could conceivably ask, what kind of abstraction? If European values are assumed, then one has no choice but to become as European as they, for they are most certainly best. And that's quite a deep one, because I made a post about this as well the other day, that because we do that a lot. We do that in Afrocentric, Pan-African, Black conscious circles a lot. We find ourselves defending ourselves against the claims of others, and we find ourselves seeking to prove that actually we do meet up to the criteria and the standards that they have decided are the important criteria and the important standards. So in this case, for example, we assume that, thinking abstractly is, first of all, we assume what that even bloody means. You know, what does that mean to think abstractly? And then we assume that, well, that's a good thing. We assume that thinking abstractly, however defined, is something that has a particular value to, and is something that we should be seeking to promote and so forth. When what we need to do is to take a step back, actually, before we even go into that. And it's an understandable sentiment. It's an understandable reaction to want to, to dispute the claims of others that are seeking to argue that we are inferior and so forth. But actually, we just end up on a, if you think about it, and to bring it into a more, something that I'm a bit more familiar with, to think about race and IQ and intelligence. And, they tell us, these white, they call themselves race realists. They will sit down and tell you, guys, listen, look at the IQ tests all around the world. Black people score much lower than everybody else all around the world consistently. If you just look at all the tests, look at the scores, the average IQ recorded in the continental Africa, they'll say is 85. The average IQ amongst the white people in the world is 100. The average IQ of Chinese people is 115 or whatever, so they'll, and then, 5-6 years ago, I was like, oh, sugar, this is, okay, what's going on here? I need to know what's going on, because this seems to be proving that black people are just innately less intelligent than white people, than others. Sugar. And obviously, the thing with that is, if you take that on board, then we all as black people, we know deep down, even the most coonish of coonery, Sean Cooneries out there, understands that if it is the case that black people are, what's the word, genetically less intelligent than everybody else, obviously that explains why black people are oppressed all over the world. That explains our downtrodden circumstances in basically all around the world, because they will say, this is the thought process. It would be explained by a supposed genetic inferiority in the realms of intelligence. So I get why you'd want to dispute that, and there are people out there who do some good work in disputing these ideas about race and IQ and so forth. But one of those guys is a guy called Chanda Chisala, who was a Zambian brother who's doing some really good work. He's battling with these race realists on their own terms, and he's basically seeking to prove that actually, when you look at the testing and the scores and stuff like that, black people actually score higher once you control for certain, socioeconomic status and this, that, and the other, and blah blah blah. And that's all very good, and that's like an entry level form of responding to that kind of argumentation. But actually, Mama Marimba Ani is saying, no, first of all, you need to start with, what is intelligence? How are we defining intelligence? What is the relationship between that definition of intelligence and our interests as Black African people? Because she's going to keep making this point throughout this chapter, that we, as Pan-Africanists, the only difference between us as Pan-Africanists and the average, white person, whether they be liberal or not, the average European, is that we are very upfront and in your face about our interest and our perspective. I'm Pan-Africanist. I'm a Black nationalist. I am Afrocentric. I'm African-centered. My interests are the interests of our people. I want to promote the interests of our people, and I'm very open and clear about that. And people will call me racist and this, that, and the other because of that. Whereas they will not say any of that. They'll hide behind the rhetoric of universalism and so forth. So we need to do, so that's how to respond is, well, what is this intelligence? How is it defined? What this IQ test, what is these IQ tests all about? Are they measuring things that we are going to serve our interest, or are they measuring things that actually, will serve the interests of the capitalist, industrial, technological order, which is what IQ tests really do? Where are we factoring in emotional intelligence? Where are we factoring in spiritual intelligence, spiritual intuition, and all these kinds of things? Are they factored into any of these things? If not, why not? Because those are the things that are important to us as African people. Those are the things which line up in our cultural thought, culturally structured thought, and so on and so forth. The point I'm making is, even if you were seeking to defend and big up your own people, but you're doing that by using the terms and concepts given to you by others. And by terms and concepts, I don't just mean using the English language, for example, as someone commented on a channel, one of my videos, saying that, I'm using English language and concepts. I'm not just talking about using the actual language. I'm using about the actual ideas, the precepts, the cultural precepts, the definitions, and so forth. Even using the language of these Europeans, which is the only language I can speak. But if you're using those, then you're inevitably going to place yourself behind them in some line of progress, and you're inevitably going to be seeking to catch up with them because you've already believed that we are behind them, and that line of progress is a line that we're supposed to all be on, if that makes sense. So we must challenge the premises of all of these concepts, all of these ideas. So the method of the chapter is, how do we do that then? What's the point? Well, basically, Mama Marimba Ani says that we must identify this kind of false universalizing by unpacking the terms and concepts that it is wrapped up in. That's what we need to do. And, this is basically what the whole book is about. And this is what a lot of the books, The Invention of Women was kind of on similar lines. And that's basically what I'm on these days most of the time is attacking these concepts and replacing them with concepts which are conducive to us as Black people. What's up, Desalines? What's up, everyone who's in the convo? What's up? We out. Good day, everyone. Habari za subuhi, habari za mchana, habari za jioni, habari za usiku, wherever you are in the world. And what's up, family? Peace up, peace and blessings. Peace out to you, my friend Desalines. And so the method of this chapter is broken down on sorry, I haven't got the page number, but this is what Mama Marimba Ani, she says. There is only one way to break the hold, and that is to be able to recognize the phenomenon of European cultural imperialism, no matter what form it takes. This recognition can be facilitated by a critical examination of the concepts that are used to package it. Its disguises range from so-called universal religion to objective scholarship, which we're going to come on to in a minute. I found that very fascinating. From the abstractions of progress, science, and knowledge to the pseudo-altruistic goals of humanitarianism, internationalism, and world peace. Our objective is to make the subtle manifestations of European cultural nationalism more easily discernible. So in this chapter, she touches on all of those. And in this book, she certainly touches on those, particularly humanitarianism. She talks a lot about those. But I think for me today in this stream, I'll focus probably just on the objectivity thing, which was really, really interesting, I felt. And then also we'll talk a tiny little bit about, I'm just scrolling down through my notes. We'll probably talk a little bit about internationalism as well, or globalism as a, as a manifesting it as one of these concepts that need, that is used to suck us into this universalism, i.e. cultural imperialism. So let's talk about the myth of objectivity. So once again, I just want to say thank you everyone who's joined. Do make sure that you like the video, share the video if you would, please. Comments, comment away. Insight. I want everyone's insights and so forth, please, in the chat. And yeah, we're going to talk about the myth of objectivity. So yeah, it feels weird. Like this objectivity is one of those things. And I remember really early in the book, there was I should have found it, but there was a place, maybe even in chapter 1, where she just briefly said something about objectivity, and said that sort of critiquing. She said something on the lines of as if objectivity is even a thing. And at the time, I was like, wait. Mwalimu, teacher, what? Can you just expand on that, please? What do you mean? Because surely objectivity is just a thing. And she does that in the book a fair amount. I find it a good book. The books that I like are the books that, even these non-fiction, heavy-going ideology books, the best books are the ones that flow, but then they'll introduce certain ideas and then they'll just leave them there, and then they'll come back to them, and when we're more ready to understand what the point that they raise. And she does that a fair bit in this book, which I like. If you're reading, and that's the thing, if you're reading carefully, you see these things, then you notice them later on kind of fleshed out more. But she talks about this objectivity thing. Objectivity, surely that's a good thing. Well, first of all, she says, objectivity, the European concept of objectivity, and remember her emphasis in this chapter is on the social sciences. So she's going to talk particularly about anthropology in a minute, but which rests on this objectivity idea. But the idea of objectivity rests, of course, on the Plato's idea of the subject being separate from the object. And I won't try not to keep repeating these things, but the idea is that the subject is the mind, and the mind is completely separate and superior to everything that's not the mind. So the mind, in their conception, of course, is this abstract thing that is not the body, that is not feelings, that is not emotions, that is not the senses and all that jazz. And the only way to really have true knowledge is to have knowledge that is obtained through the mind, abstract knowledge. That's true knowledge. True knowledge, true truth is abstract only, and you can't get truth through physicality or the senses. That's just the lower form of knowledge, if you like. That's just opinions and stuff like that. Whereas knowledge is, true knowledge is objective, and it is the what's the word? Only the mind can get this true knowledge, basically, and the mind is the subject, which is separate from the object, which is everything else. So Marimba Ani reminds us that Plato was not just he wasn't just someone who was just coming up with a bunch of abstract ideas. Rather, Plato was someone who had social organization in mind. He envisaged a form of society where rational men, and that is males for him and his people them, would order and control society rationally, according to rationality, using rationality to order and control society. His successors continued with the same approach of social engineering. And then Mama Marimba Ani brings up this guy called Saint-Simon. And I'd heard of Saint-Simon. Saint-Simon is basically like apparently Karl Marx called Saint-Simon one of the patriarchs of socialism. So this guy, interesting guy actually, check him out, Saint-Simon. But basically Saint-Simon, he now going back to this objectivity thing, he was really concerned about people's perspectives coming into social theory. And he really felt that actually, no, social theory must be scientific, and scientific means objective. That means free from people's perspectives, free from people's opinions, free from people's cultural situations, cultural context, social cultural context, and so forth. Which initially you'd think, hey, that sounds good. Yeah, let's get to rational science that is not objective. Let's get objective truth. Never mind all this subjective stuff. It sounds good, doesn't it? But what Mama Marimba Ani says that this is actually this idea of trying to of promoting this idea of objectivity was actually to serve the political function of brainwashing others, basically. So she writes, quoting from Saint-Simon. So Saint-Simon said, "Hitherto, the method of the sciences of observation, i.e. social sciences, has not been introduced into... Hitherto, the method of the sciences of observation, i.e. natural sciences, has not been introduced into political questions. Every man has imported his point of view, method of reasoning and judging, and hence there is not yet any precise precision in the answers or universality in the results. The time has come when this infancy of the science, that is the social science, should cease, and certainly it is desirable that it should cease, for the troubles of the social order arise from the obscurities in political theory." And that last sentence is an important one, and again, I probably wouldn't have probably even seen this unless Mama Marimba Ani had brought this up and broke it down for me. But this idea of there's obscurities and vagueness in social science, and there's no, what Mama Marimba Ani is saying is that what he's doing really, he's portraying European cultural nationalism. He's saying he wants European cultural nationalism, European cultural thought to be accepted as science. And actually, what he wants to see is this so-called quote unquote scientific methods to be implanted in people, which will then enable the remolding and the reshaping of everything in the interests of the European asili. So, by becoming rational, becoming objective, we think is objective, but it's not. By becoming European in our thought and our way of, separating subject from object and rationalism and all that sort of stuff. By doing that, we then make ourselves tools for that European expansion and for the imposition of the technical order over all more and more areas of life. So, sorry, guys. So you see this a little bit with how everything is all about science. People think science is like the truth. Science is the truth. Science is just facts. Everything else is just opinion. So I've written down a few things here. So scientific racism. I've talked about IQ testing, racist AI, all the, if Europeans or anyone else, can concoct a mythology about Black people being scientifically inferior, just genetically inferior. It's in the genes, it's in the bodies. It's in, if they can concoct a convincing story on those lines, then it kind of naturalizes our oppression, doesn't it? As I've said already, anyway. Sorry, I'm repeating what I've said already. But to just flesh that out a little bit more, this justifies the violence against us because we're inferior and so forth. It's just in our bodies. That's how sort of science kind of is used by in an in anti-blackness. But going back to this whole thing of objectivity, anthropology, Mama Marimba Ani argues, anthropology was very concerned about objectivity. Now, Mama Marimba Ani has got a lot to say about anthropology because that's what she taught when she was a teacher or a lecturer. She taught anthropology, and she says at the beginning of the book that she realized that anthropology is a massively important tool in anti-blackness, in European imperialism, basically cultural imperialism. And so a lot of what she's saying in this book is aimed at critiquing European anthropology. And she says that this objectivity has been a cloak of science that has protected the academy in general, but in particular has protected the social sciences from any real scrutiny, because if something can be portrayed as science, then it's outside of any kind of culture or political interest and so forth. And so it's, that's a very potent tool. If you can go to people in Africa, for example, and say, listen, we've got science. We're not here to impose our culture or anything on you. We've just got science. Look, it's science. Look, we're sharing science. It's just an objective thing that we've got here. It's science. It's a set of approaches that are just objective to everybody. And guys, look, it just so happens that science says that the best thing to do, is to block up your environment and turn all your land into turn it into cash crops for the wider world, because this is the way to develop. This is the way to progress. This is the way to the path to affluence is to do all of these things, the universalism of wanting to, catch up with the West and all that sort of stuff. So anthropology was right up there as well. Had that same, used that same cloak of science to legitimize its project of cultural imperialism, the project of anthropology being cultural imperialism. And Mama Marimba Ani makes a point that by the time she was writing, certainly, and from about the 1960s, objectivity, the alleged objectivity of the social sciences, was under severe pressure, mainly led by African students in the 1960s onwards, who showed the ethnological foundations of academia in general and social sciences in particular. So before she's going to give a really good example of that. Barbara John Henrik Clark, and others, they had a controversy in I think it was in anthropology or African studies, sorry, which we'll come to in a minute. But first, let's just talk a little bit more about objectivity. Define it a little bit more. So I've written down here, where is it? A quote from page 516. What's this? Yeah, okay. So this quote on page 516. I'll read it here. Hang on a second. Sorry. Oh no, I might skip that. Yeah. So what she says, I won't read this particular quote, but one thing she says is that the liberals, in particular, faced with this obvious critique of the fact that of the clearly cultural foundations, European cultural foundations, and precepts that drive anthropology, i.e., anthropology is not objective; it's European actually. European liberals, seek to defend anthropology in a way that doesn't actually accept any real critique of the epistemological foundations of this objectivity idea, but rather seeks to sort of repair it and enhance these precepts. So she says, it leads as well to the questioning of the scientific character of any information gathering and its subsequent interpretation, i.e., when you start to question, when you start to delve into objectivity, you start to realize that actually, this goes quite deep. So she quotes someone called Mackay. Mackay concludes that subjectivity is encountered throughout the scientific process. Again, subjectivity, i.e., the fact that every single researcher or academic or whatever is bringing their context with them to the work that they're doing. There's no such thing as just completely objective. This is just a completely objective study. No, you are who you are. You are what you are, and you are bringing that. You've got your ways of thinking, your ways of interpreting information. You've got the study that you've even done. The fact that you've chosen that study has been driven by your cultural context, by your ideology, by your institutional context, and all that sort of stuff. We saw a lot of that in the invention of women. Oyewumi talked a lot about that. When Oyewumi pointed out that when people go and study women in Africa, they do so even assuming that the word women has relevance and meaning in the context of the cultures that they're going to, and also, why have they chosen to study women as opposed to any other particular group? Why women? They're just importing their ideas, their Western feminist ideas into their studies. But anyway, that's the point. Subjectivity is just everywhere. It's just a norm in so-called scientific process. And then back to the book, he attempts to redefine the concept of objectivity. Conventionally, in keeping with Platonic epistemology, it meant conformity with the object and independence from the subject. So just to be clear there, this objectivity means that, like, when we're doing science or whatever, me as a subject is irrelevant. I bring nothing of importance to this apart from just looking at the object and studying the object. But it's all impartial, and I'm disinterested and so forth. But, says Mackay, the content of knowledge is never entirely independent. Rather, it is the result of the meeting of the subject and the object. This, he says, is true of scientific knowledge generally, for there is always the possibility of different perspectives. Mackay suggests, therefore, that the only requisite for objectivity be that one's observations and conclusions are partly determined by the object. Elimination of the subject is not necessary. So this is someone who's critiquing this idea of objectivity and pointing out that there really is no such thing as objectivity. But Mama Marimba Ani points out that this person and liberals like him really want to protect objectivity by sifting out. There's like, let's sift out the subjectivity, and let's still be, and then we've got true objectivity. Let's just be aware of the subjectivity of it all. But but they want to protect objectivity. Now, this is something that came up when we were reading Oyewumi. We talked about this idea called perspectivism. And to read here, perspectivism is the epistemological principle that perception of and knowledge of something are always bound by the interpretive perspectives of those observing it. While perspectivism does not regard all perspectives and interpretations as being of equal truth and value, it holds that no one has access to an absolute view of the world cut off from perspective. Instead, all such viewing occurs from some point of view, which in turn affects how things are perceived. I appreciate this might be going a little bit down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I just love this because it reminds me, the first thing I think of is religion. And, religion's a great example of where this is really important to understand that perspective is very, very important. The idea that there's like a true truth, abstract, separate from us, that we, and, by which I'm talking about, whether it be the Christian gospel or the truth of Islam or whatever it might be. There's this truth. Here it is. It's just the truth. That is the gospel, this truth, the good news. It's just there. Your job, you just need to understand that and believe that. Don't bring your own opinion. No. Just believe that truth and then you'll be saved. But this is ludicrous because everything that we perceive is perceived through our senses. So, and this perception is obviously an active process. It's not a passive thing. So what does God mean? What's God? What does it mean? What's faith? What's love? What's truth? These are not givens. All these concepts are not givens. That you must interpret these things. And as soon as you interpret these things, you are bringing yourself into it. You're bringing your culture into it. Obviously, the people who wrote the books, they were all the Bible or the whatever, they're all bringing their perspective, they're bringing all their culture. You know, how you understand the term God is not necessarily going to be the same as how the next person interprets the term God. And it's not to say that we're going down a completely subjective, like just sea of like no real meaning to anything. Everyone defines what true is. No, not necessarily going down that road. But the road I am going down is to say that, you know, truth, I suppose it's almost like saying truth is cultural. You know, it's all what you think is true is always going to be contextualized. It's always going to be framed by your background, your context that you're in. She had a really good example of a few chapters before. She talked about some group that they didn't have a concept of having something in their culture. When you look at their language, like there is no word or no concept for I have this is mine. I'll find it and I'll do a comment. I'll do a community thing on it. But basically, their idea was something that like the concept of an individual having something didn't resonate in their culture, because the concept of an individual owning something you didn't really own something in that culture. It was just a foreign concept to them. That's a bit of an example of how, you know, of how this whole process worked. I'll come to some of those comments in a minute, guys, by the way. But Oyeronke Oyewumi as well, she mentioned it in her book about how in Yoruba culture, when it comes to the traditions of in Ifa, the traditions, the stories, you know, the narratives of, you know, the praise songs and so forth, she basically makes the point that they always understood that there's no such thing as some objective tradition. All traditions actively involve the person saying the tradition, the person reciting the tradition, the person communicating the tradition. And in that sense, these narratives and traditions are always critically deployed. There's no such thing. There's no pretense of objectivity, because everything was actively and openly, filtered and interpreted or whatever by the person, you know, with the tradition, if that makes sense. So anyway, the point I'm just basically saying here is that we need to understand that this applies to all forms of knowledge. You cannot separate the knower from the known, and actually, this means that there can't be any real such thing as objectivity as defined by Europeans. And I mean, I'd say probably maybe nor should there really be, you know, the concept of objectivity. Or the question is, should there be? Should we even want to get this concept of objectivity? Anywho, let me just have a look at some of these comments here before I just go on. So, peace, we out. You said, reminds me of Science and Oppression by J. Carruthers, Asante Sana family. I'm going to put that on the Carruthers, Science and Oppression. Where is it? Science and Oppression. Good. Yeah, I'll put that in the to have a look at that. Thank you. And then everything was politics, you said. And the practitioners / experts become the authority figure on said subjects' issues. They dominate the discourse because, you know, they have all the answers. Yeah, exactly. And it also reinforces the status quo, i.e. classism. Yeah, these are gatekeepers, aren't they? These people who are coming with their objectivity and science. And it's like, yes, and we're here to filter all of this knowledge for you. They're like Mama Marimba Ani makes she refers to these scientists as like the high priests of scientism. Actually, the new religion of scientism. The scientists are the high priests, basically. But so this objectivity thing, Mama Marimba Ani then says something very important. She says that Europeans would never condone all this stuff that I'm saying. Europeans won't condone this stuff really, because it would mean great conflict within and the destruction of their asili. So she says she says, the implication of Mackay's proposed redefinition of objectivity are radical in the context of the European Utamawazo. A change that the phenomenologists have been attempting to effect for over a century. It would mean a complete break from the epistemology that is based on the idea and methodology of objectification, on which the total separation of the subject and object, of the knower from the known, is predicated. Ultimately, the implications of a radical change in the definition of knowledge, or what it means to know, are not only a change in epistemological methodology, i.e., this isn't just some like surface level thing that, like, okay, the Europeans will be able to say, all right, let's change how we do science. Let's just tweak how we do science, and then we'll carry on doing science, but just enhance it and make it better. She says, no, it wouldn't just be this. But it wouldn't just be a change of epistemological methodology, but a change in the European concept of the self, with corresponding changes in the conception of the other and behavior towards others as well. If the traditional mode of European science, i.e. objectification, loses its position of primacy on their scale of values, the redefinition of the culture itself theoretically becomes possible. But the ultima rojo, the energetic drive of the culture, will not allow such a change. Any other conception would be inconsistent with the asili. The culture would be in basic conflict and therefore cease to function. It would not fit its members. Change would have to occur at the most fundamental level, the level of the asili. We are talking about destruction. My suspicion is that neither Mackay nor the phenomenologists are ready for anything that drastic. So it's a big, basically she's going back to Asili and saying that, listen, all this stuff we're talking about, the subject object, Plato's idea of subject object separation, this isn't just it's not a nice to have in Europe, in the European Asili. It's not some peripheral thing that you could just get rid of and just carry on being all European. She's saying that no, if you turn away from this subject object objectification thing, you are basically going to destroy the European asili. You're going to destroy a European cultural thought and European, you're going to diffuse or what's the word? Put out the flame of the European energetic drive, because it all depends on this subject-object separation, and the expansionism of European culture is all about based on that subject-object separation, and they're very, very, very serious about all this sort of stuff. So the point she's making is that Europeans would not go down any kind of road to really, seriously critique objectification, because objectivity, because objectivity basically gives them the grounds on which they can do their cultural imperialism. So that's all very good. I've put some notes here to say that it makes me think about thinking more about the European right wingers. It helps to explain, and some of the left, why they're opposed. There's this whole anti-woke thing. They're against critical race theory. They're against woke culture and all this sort of stuff. And sometimes we can think of these things as being stupid culture wars stuff, as if culture wars is something that's really not important in comparison to guns and bombs wars and mortar wars. But that stuff is very, very important. Why are they so opposed, for example, to critical race theory? Well, here in the UK, we're in a ridiculous situation where we have a Nigerian woman. What's her name actually? Kemi Badenoch. That's it. Her surname's Scottish because she's married to a Scottish man, or a man from Scottish heritage, Badenoch. But her first name Kemi gives the clue away. I don't know what her maiden name was, but anyway, she's like the Minister for Culture or something here in the UK now. Sadly here in the UK, Kemi, thank you, yeah, Kemi Badenoch. Sadly, she's an example of like a lot of mainly Nigerians, but also other West Africans, frankly, mainly, who are leading the charge, the black conservative charge here. Kwasi Kwarteng was another one. He was a chancellor of the Exchequer for about 2 months. There's a bunch, and even not just Africans, there's a bunch of other ones. Rishi Sunak, for example, the bloody prime minister now. These guys leading the charge of the conservatives. And Kemi Badenoch, she's like an outspoken critic of critical race theory. She criticizes it. She's lambasting it. She's trying to ban the books, probably, and stuff like that. Why is that? Why? What's this opposition to critical race theory? What's this opposition to wokeness? Well, the opposition is an example of what Marimba Ani has just said in that chapter. If you critical race theory, it's not perfect, but from what I understand of it, critical race theory and critical theory more generally, but especially critical race theory, it fights to expose, or fights to basically make it clear that to expose the cultural specificity of things that we consider to be universal. So it fights to show that what we consider to be science, what we consider to be history, what we consider to be whatever, morality, all these kinds of things, gender, race, sexuality, even all these things are Western, are European ideas of all of those things. And actually, once you do that, once you recognize that actually all these things are not a universal God given from the universal God or whatever, these are parochial, these are very ethnically specific ideas and so forth. Once you grasp that, then you start to, it opens up the floor, it opens up the doors for books like Yurugu and other kinds of studies and stuff, which will actually critique these cultures, cultural thoughts, cultural ideas. So the people who are against wokeism and critical race theory, they're fighting against the re-examination of their assumptions and key concepts in Western culture, because they recognize that, their dominance of the world depends on people accepting these things as being universals. And Black conservatives who are part of the backlash, sadly, are, they're thus hindering the liberatory energy of African people, because they're blocking our efforts to expose European thought and behavior for what it is. So I mentioned liberals, and I mentioned how liberals, who understand this problem, liberals who get it, do you know what I mean? They get it. They can see it's bloody obvious that like concepts of science and stuff like that are all subjective and they're all European or whatever. What we take to be universal is actually European. They get it, but what they do, like I said, they seek to kind of refine the ideas of Plato rather than reject them. And she breaks it down here in this quote. I don't know why I've not. Oh, page 519. Yeah, page 519. She says this: the danger. She just talked about one of these Euro liberals who was like saying, "Yeah, let's get rid of the subject. Let's get rid of the subjectivity so we can have pure objectivity. Perfect." And Mama Ani says the danger here is that one becomes committed to the creation of a super rational human being, a person who gains independence from, i.e. control over, even her epistemological presuppositions. In this view, the Platonic concept is not rejected, it is improved upon. Having found subjectivity, i.e. the person, as irrationality, to have crept into the epistemological methodology of objectification. Oh gosh, that's a lot of big words. Hang on, let's just say that sentence again. Having found subjectivity to have crept into the epistemological methodology of objectification, the goal becomes that of recognizing and controlling this subjective element. This view is has very different implications from one that rejects rationality and control as valued modes of understanding. So the point she's making there is that when, it's not enough to just try and refine. You've got to reject. You've got to throw out these assumptions. You've got to throw them out completely and start afresh, which is what I'm, my headspace is trying to get into that. Is trying to get there of just reject all their precepts and start from scratch. Not from scratch, but start from our own precepts, start from our own cultural, values and principles and so forth, if that makes sense. Cool. All right. So she then gives a case study of where some Africans have battled against the universalizing of Europeans, and it's a fascinating one. It involves John Henrik Clarke, and it's from 1970, the African Studies Association. So I'll read it from here. It's page 524. It says, the myth of objectivity and the use of the methodology of objectification, i.e. scientism, is one aspect of universalism as an expression of the European ultima rojo and as a tool of Western cultural imperialism. By offering an ethnographic example from contemporary European American society, I can demonstrate how this works. In 1970, the African and African American members of the African Studies Association, i.e. ASA, challenged the work of the then 12-year-old organization as being fundamentally invalid and illegitimate. The ASA represented the American academic establishment. Its members were mainly from the socio-economic middle stratum of the white colonial majority, just as Mackay describes the existential situation of the European anthropologists abroad, i.e. the people who ran this American African Studies Association were all middle-class liberal Europeans. The dissenters, i.e. the likes of Baba John Henrik Clarke, said that instead of furthering Euro-American interest in Africa, the study of African life should be undertaken from a Pan-Africanist perspective. These Pan-Africanists acknowledged their own perspective and wanted it and their participation to influence the ideological thrust and of the activities and work of the ASA. In an article entitled Confrontation at Montreal, Professor John Henrik Clarke said, "African peoples will no longer permit our people to be raped culturally, economically, politically, and intellectually merely to provide European scholars with intellectual status symbols of African artifacts hanging in their living rooms and irrelevant and injurious lectures in their classrooms. We suspect that this is a new era of academic colonialism and that it is not unrelated to the neo-colonialism that is attempting to re-enslave Africa by controlling the minds of African people." And that's just, that there has just made me, that point there that John Henrik Clarke said there, Baba John Henrik Clarke said there, he likened the struggle to basically decolonize African studies. He said it was analogous and connected to the struggle to decolonize actual Africa. You know, so in this, sadly, in here I am, 10th of June 2023, foundational Black Americans and American descendants of slavery are trending hashtags, and they're here trying to say that African Americans, and we're not African, we're American, you know, and trying to their hardest to separate themselves from the continent of Africa, their motherland. It shows how far we've fallen, frankly, because back in them days, you had the likes of Baba John Henrik Clarke and others who were very, very openly connecting their struggles as Black people in America with the struggles of Black people in the continent. So it's a sad, sad state of affairs. But anyway, the group argued that scholarship was indeed political in its conclusions and uses. They stated their perspective and ideological commitments openly and said that the political interests of the African peoples should determine the character of African studies. The group rejected the offer of token representation made by the ASA, and under the leadership of John Henrik Clarke, James Turner, Chike Onuachi, and others, the African Heritage Studies Association split irrevocably from the ASA. Now, let us look briefly, this is the more important bit probably. Let's look briefly at the method of counter-argument used by their opponents. In an article entitled Politics and Scholarship, published by the ASA journal African Studies Review, Benjamin Naimer begins patronizingly by saying that, quote, two good goals are in collision in the African studies in the United States: the fostering of certain Black interests and the untrammeled pursuit of scholarship, unquote. The word certain is a signpost signaling the limitations of the Pan-Africanist position, while scholarship represents the universal and therefore that which is valued. This meant that the Pan-Africanists were opposing scholarship, an indefensible position. Like science and progress or truth, scholarship is someone no one wants to tamper with. Who among us, after all, wants to interfere with the pursuit of science or with the course of progress on which it takes us? We're encouraged to perceive these to be universal pursuits, not particular or parochial like Pan-African self-determination. There is no question in Naimer's mind about who will survive the collision. Anyway, so yeah, that's like an example of this kind of process of, you know, us as liberation-minded Africans, you know, we turn around and tell these Europeans, listen, what you're doing is not objective. What you're doing is not universal. You are literally just colonizing our knowledge. You're colonizing our African studies. And they turn around and say, oh, well, no, we're just here for scholarship. All we're doing is scholarship. We just want to pursue truth. And it's not about your, you know, Black stuff or or Pan-Africanism. Or no, it's not even about white stuff. No, it's not about race. It's about truth. It's about the pursuit of knowledge and so forth. And then people fall for that. A lot of people fall for that. A lot of black people, sadly, fall for this, and they line themselves up unwittingly with those who are actively opposed to us. And even these European liberals, unwittingly or not, they also line themselves up against us by making these kinds of counterattacks against us. What I find interesting is that these people never define their truth, or they never properly locate their truth as being culturally specific. They always call us Afrocentric. Oh, Afrocentric. Look, this is Afrocentric. The Afrocentrics are whitewashing history or blackwashing. The Afrocentrists are doing this. This is Afrocentric. They constantly use these terms to put us in a box so that it scares other people away. Oh, this is black knowledge. What's this black study? Oh, black. No. Because we've been taught very well to think that anything that's culturally specific is bad, not realizing and not understanding that what is supposed to be universal is actually culturally specific. And obviously, if they were to do that, then they would be far less ideological. If they were to just come out and say, "Yeah, we're basically promoting European thought," they would be far less effective in what they're doing. Cool. All right. Make sure you like the video, by the way. Thank you, everyone who's with us so far. We are probably about 2/3 of the way through. Just a couple more comments I'll make in this chapter, I think. So we're going well time-wise. Peace out to you, fabulous Gela. Sorry if is it Gela or Gila or Gila? Anyway, peace to you, my family. Karibu. You said there have been black folks for a long time who sided with the colonizers. Some of us felt better than and tried to disassociate from freshwater Africans. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we know this. I mean, a lot of freshwater. I like that term, freshwater Africans. But frankly, I'm a continental African, I suppose, because I was born there and whatnot. But we all separate ourselves from Africans just within ourselves, sadly. This is what this whole process is. It's a process of decolonizing our minds and reacquainting ourselves with our Africanity, with our blackness, So yeah, thank you for that. And then We Out said, white supremacy strength is in its normalcy. They normalize. They don't call it Eurothought because it's thought to be standard. Perfect, better, much better characterization, summarizing of what Mama Marimba Ani is saying here. Exactly that. And that's our job. Our job is to keep exposing and saying, no, this is not just the truth. And I wonder if she'll talk a bit more about this whole thing about objectivity, because I suppose her position is probably going to be something like, listen, there's no point in pretending that there is a objectivity. There's no point in pretending that there is actual universals in most of the time. Most of the time, the things that we should concern ourselves with are definitely not universal. They are specific, and we shouldn't be scared. We shouldn't be shy with saying that, and we shouldn't be shy about basing our activities, whether it be our intellectual activities or our political activities, our military activities, whatever you might want to say, base those things, not trying to persuade others that, yeah, this all fits into the universal, which is the European, but seeking to, what's the word? Anyway, hopefully you get what I'm trying to say there. But yeah, that's it. Let's not pretend this universalism. Cool. All right. So a couple more things I wanted to comment here on. I did want to mention this internationalism. She talks about internationalism, and where are we? Should I read that? No, maybe I won't read that actually, because that might take us a little bit. But basically, I won't read the whole quote. But basically, she talks about internationalism and how these guys, these Europeans, are very much in this process of projecting them. Obviously, we've talked about expansionism, and the Europeans are all about expanding themselves out into the known objective world out there, you know, to be so colonialism and so forth. But another manifestation of this expansionism is in the form of setting up of an international order. So she talks about the European Economic Community and how, which is some of you young cats might not remember. I remember the EEC. I remember when there was an EEC. This EEC, European Economic Community, was the forerunner of the European Union. And it's interesting, Marimba Ani is writing in the mid-1990s, and she's talking conceptually about what actually came about maybe 10 years later with the Treaty of Rome, or maybe it was around about the same time. She talks about how Saint Simon and others were calling for a European federation, basically. And I'll read this bit here. She says, this kind of internationalization is an expression of intense European nationalism, all the more essential for Europe since Europeans and their descendants actually represent only 10% of the world's population. They, like their antecedent slavers before them, live in fear that Africans and other majority peoples will one day speak with one voice. So, I mean, that just keeps coming back over and over again. But the formation of these bodies, the European Economic Community, the European Union, is all about, you know, helping the Europeans to be able to expand out. But then you've got your Bretton Woods organizations, by which I mean the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These titles, the United Nations, UNESCO, the World Trade Organization, what's some of the other ones? Yeah, all these bodies, all these like international institutions and so forth, you know, they're very, very effective. Even like these declarations, you get these declarations, the Declaration of Human Rights, the Declaration of Child Rights, the Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs, I don't know what the S stands for now. All these things, they're all excellent rhetorical tools to get people around the world to buy into this, to buy into Europeanism, if you want to call it. They're basically like they're all these bodies are a projection of Europeans across the world. I will read this because I think this is important. The value. So she talks about there's this dichotomy that you often hear between nationalism and internationalism. Obviously, nationalism is bad. Internationalism is good. But Mama Marimba Ani says on page 53 that this dichotomy is most often predicated on the assumption that all nationalistic ideologies must be defined in terms of the imperative of cultural aggression. Ironically, this is a concept based on the historical definition and content of Western European nationalism and European cultural commitment. It is the commitment to European forms that necessarily implies aggression. The aggression is demanded by the Asili. Yeah, so mainly the point that Mama Marimba Ani is making is that nationalism in and of itself isn't necessarily aggressive or violent. Only European nationalism is. But basically, the Europeans use these international institutions and so forth to basically promote and project themselves around the world. And then she talks about world culture as well, briefly. People talking about global culture. And don't forget all your parochial tribal cultures or national cultures. No, we're trying to set up a world culture, a culture where we all live in peace and harmony and all that kind of stuff. And Mama Marimba Ani makes a point that these are all ways for the Europeans to get out of having to actually study themselves, by constantly projecting all the time. Even their negatives. She makes a point that they project not only their so-called positives, but also their negatives. And this is something I don't know why I haven't got it here, but I put a quote on my channel page the other day about how you often hear people saying things like, "Yeah, man has got an insatiable desire to control and destroy nature, and man this, man that, human this, human that." And it's like, stop lumping us together with you, European people. Stop it. You have this insatiable desire to separate yourself from nature. You guys have this insatiable desire to dominate and to control. You lot have this insatiable desire to bring everything into a rationalistic order. That's you guys. You are not man in the generic sense. That's just you. So stop lumping us together with you when it comes to your negatives, because they are aware of their negatives. That's where the liberals come in. The liberals are very aware of the negatives of European culture, but they, more often than not, they'll portray it as the negatives of just humans. Humans are mashing up the world. It's like, I mean, not really. And to the extent the rest of the world is, it's mainly because we've taken on your forms of economic organization, political organization, and so on and so forth. So yeah, stop lumping us together. Right. Every time I hear that human argument, I cringe. Yeah, that's once, and that's it's a big one. It's an important one, because once now I've started doing this basically. Every time I hear anyone talking about, oh yeah, humanity, like you just think, just check it out. Usually something like, that's not humanity. It's a particular segment of humanity who are doing these things. It's Europeans or whatever. It's not the rest of us, and I think having that mindset as well, being able to identify that false universe, lumping us together, is very useful to avoid getting trapped in the movements to solve these problems, because you're just going to join in with these movements of European-led movements, or movements that are based on the logic of European culture and ideology. You're just going to end up repeating and reproducing the same forms that you were trying to work against, if that makes sense. So yeah, I really do love that. Very, 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 very generative, I think, that whole kind of line of thought. Timeless Ascension, peace to you. What a wonderful name that is. Love that name. Jinalako ni nzuri sana, ndugu wangu. Your name is very good. My sibling, my family. Fabulous Gela, we are not them. We are not the same. They're something else. And then we not said Fabulous Gela, which begs the question, what are they? Yeah, I mean, And again, even this whole area of what do you mean we are not them? And why are you even asking what are they? This is racism. We're all the same. We're just all the same, It's like, I mean, we sort of are in one sense, but then we're really not in many other senses. There are some very real differences between us, specificities between us. And I actually think that, when we touched on some of the things that Richard King talked about in the previous chapter, I think the more we study, the more we contemplate these things, the more we do those things, basically, the more we do have to get to a point of like understanding that there are most likely some very real, I wouldn't say these are innate differences, but there are very real differences on a sort of, even on a biological level, not just on a surface level biological level, but just in terms of, ability to perceive, ability to connect, basic motivational, energetic drives, and so forth. There's just, but that's for another day. And then Fabulous Gala said, oh, peace to you, thank you, Timeless Ascension, peace to you, brother. They said, and then we are aliens, demons. I mean, people might say that black people are aliens because we're so connected to the cosmos. Black gold, we're the black gold of the sun, and them ones, But anywho, good. And then there we go. Yeah, there's a lot in this chapter as usual. One thing I'd say as well, I hold my hand up. I must hold my hand up as I'm about to soon to finish this stream, but I must hold my hand up that we've done 10 sessions on this book, Yurugu, and it's very evident to me that to properly study a book like Yurugu, reading one chapter a week is not going to cut it. You need to, I personally think now I look back on it, what I should have probably done is done one chapter a month, because there's so much in this book. In each chapter, there's she's not just talk, oh, here's a little factoid. Okay, let's move on. Here's another little factoid. Here's another little idea. Move on. She's like, I think she obviously wrote this book with the intention of it being probably on an academic book, basically a book that is like, that should be up there, like, as like a basic main kind of like main textbook. It's weighty. It's not even that big. It's only 500 and something pages. I've got the Blueprint for Black Power is longer than this, for example, but it's a book. There's times I'm reading it and I'm like, I'm basically skipping a few pages or like reading a bit lightly because I'm like, look, I'm not going to have time. I'm not going to be able to get through this whole chapter before Saturday, and I need to be able to make notes. So let me just skip through. So I'm thinking about when I'm next going to reread the book, and when I next reread the book, I probably will maybe like, I don't know, maybe next year or something, like start another study. But it will, it will be something like one chapter a month, so that we can really get into it and really, let it kind of blend into us, blend into my psyche or whatever it might be. But yeah, really good book. A couple of, I'll get some of these comments here. Yeah, so but black us don't need protection from the environment. We're comfortable and at home on Earth. Yeah, I mean, can't wait. I'm definitely gonna do a book or something on a book or that's on that melanin, the melanin thing, because it's very, very, very important. It's funny as well because my son, my eldest, I realized that he's very receptive and very open to Pan-African. He's only 5, by the way. He's very receptive to ideas. So for him, he's just like, it's just taken for granted that, like, oh yeah, so we could, we don't have to worry about the sun. We, all this stuff that we're talking about now, if he could understand it, if he could be bothered to sit through all this, he'd be like, well, yeah. Yes, we're different. He gets it. We are different. We're different people. Wow. And then I'll just skip to Desaline's comment here. Desaline says, I'm telling you, they are set up for an environment that does not exist. They seek and consume and will kill anything that gets in the way of that process. Yeah, they do. And you have to know that. You have to know that. I think one of the things I maybe would like to look into a little bit as well is the Chinese, their ideas, because I wonder if they get that. They've got that because they had a pretty horrendous time of it with the Europeans as well, particularly in the 1800s. When I don't know if you've ever heard of the Opium Wars, but basically the British and I think the French, they might work. These colonial rivals often work together. So Haiti is Desaline's, great name, is a good example. After the Africans kicked out the French, defeated the French, I think the British, the Dutch, the French all came together, sent forces to try and retake Haiti. What's my point? Forgot what I was saying. Yeah, they sent forces to retake Haiti. So that's it. Yeah. So they worked together quite a lot. They've often worked together. The Berlin Conference, for example, was a conference between nations who had just been fighting each other over many, many years and would just go on to fight each other again, like 20, 30 years later in their first big, huge tribal war of the 20th century, their 20th century, I should say. But the Chinese were subjected to that when the British basically wanted to turn the whole of China into an opium heroin addicts, basically, because the East India Company was going to sell all the opium to them, the Chinese. So, and they did successfully. The Chinese tried to, protest, and they just sent guns over there and just mashed them up so that they could flood the country with drugs, hard drugs. So I would like to see, because now obviously we've got the Chinese. The Chinese are a major player, and I don't know much about them. I don't know much about their ideology and so forth. But I imagine that somewhere in there, in their guiding ideologies, there probably is a recognition that, guys, these people that we are, Europe and America, the European world, I think they get it. I think they probably get it with regard to what their Western Europeans are like, or Western Eurasians are like. But then interestingly, yeah, Fabius Geller, you said the Asians, I think, are basically European, Eurasia. Yeah, that's another thing as well. So I'd be keen as well to see if anyone's written a Yurugu or something anywhere on those lines with regards to other parts, because this is all about European Western Eurasian thought, but I'd like to see some critique of the other Eurasia, the people from the other Eurasians, basically. Yes, and then I'll come back to one of those comments. And then everything is politics. You said, without us, they probably would have killed each other off by now. Yeah, we are delaying the process. That's one of the main points of this Yurugu. She says that, listen, like exactly that. Like if left to themselves, they would have obviously destroyed each other by now. The rest of the cosmos is there to basically, for them to be able to let off a lot of that aggressive steam, which drives everything about them in their own culture. Colonialism and neocolonialism and so forth enables them to be able to basically not end up being too violent towards each other. Cool. And then you said that you're still on chapter 2, been reading it for 6 months. Yeah, exactly. This definitely is a I mean, I was talking to a brother the other day, and they said they met Mama Marimba Ani the other day, a couple of months ago, and she apparently this person told her, oh yeah, we read Yurugu in our book study, and she replied, she was like, well, you shouldn't have done that. You should have started with something more like Foucault, Baba Foucault, who wrote Kindezi, but he also wrote a book called the Bakongo. He's written a few books. One of them is like the Bakongo Bantu philosophy of something. I can't remember what the term is, but yeah, she was basically like, listen, you don't start off with a book like this. And I'm like, in retrospect, yeah, I get it. I wouldn't have done this book at this point in time, to be honest. I would have probably left it or done it in a different way. And then Timeless Ascension, you said that I tuned into Elder Marimba's lecture on Yurugu, and it was profound to say the least. Yeah, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but I would say that the lectures are essential listening to. There's not many lectures of hers, but there's like one or two, which I think Everything is Politics. You told me about one of the lectures that I watched for the first time a few just before we did this book, and I'm really glad I listened to those lectures first, because you get a sense of how she thinks and how she puts her ideas together and how she progresses and how thoughtful and meticulous she is with her ideas, and also how combative and, you know what I mean, like how many F's she does not give when she's, you know what I mean, critiquing Europeans and others. So yeah, definitely recommend the lectures that are there on YouTube. Some of the absolute best lectures that I've ever read. I'd probably say, listen, there's only Mama Marimba Ani, Baba Amos Wilson. As far as like the level of the scholarship and the delivery and the pacing of their speeches, the lectures, some of the finest ever. And you know, definitely recommend, guys, that everyone listens to any lectures they can get from Mama Marimba Ani. Sorry about that. I removed myself from the stream for some reason. But anyway, cool. So we'll just read the conclusion, because I thought that the way she concluded the chapter was really good, and it would basically be foolish of me to try and put it in my own words. So, words. So let me read this last couple of paragraphs here, and then we'll call it a day. Cool. All right, let's read as follows. We cannot mobilize for effective resistance to our physical destruction unless we are ideologically liberated. So I'm going to make a post with that sentence, because how good is that? What impedes that liberation is cultural imperialism. European universalism and its attendant spurious humanism are very dangerous and effective forms of cultural imperialism. Universalism, when translated scientistically, becomes objectification. The illusion of objectivity promotes the myth of universalistic commitment. That is, it is the reason I like this is because it kind of summarizes everything in the chapter as well, which is good. So universalism, when translated scientistically, becomes objectification. The illusion of objectivity promotes the myth of universalistic commitment. That is, it is a stance that disavows political or group interest, as we've talked about. It thereby services group interest more subtly by calling it something other than what it is. We can conclude that this universalism semantically represents European value. It is not a universally valid goal, and as an imperative serves the interest of the European cultural imperialism in the following manner. So this is how it works. Once individuals are persuaded that universal characteristics are the proper human goals, European patterns and values can be presented as universal, while others are labelled as particular. Then, European ideology can be proselytized or promoted without the appearance of imposition, invasion, conquest, exploitation, or chauvinism. And at that point, it's important to remember a point that Barbara Amos Wilson makes on that, which is that physical oppression, exploitation is hard work, and it's just very inefficient, if you want to say that. But ideological oppression is much, much more efficient because you don't have to do the dirty work. You just get the people that you're dominating to do it for you. The European claim to universalism is a formidable weapon, and victims of European aggression can successfully combat it if we proceed as follows, which gives 3 steps. 1, refuse to accept universality as either humanly possible or desirable. 2, critically assess all universalistic concepts, including monotheism, scientific objectivity, progressivism, abstract humanism, and reject them when they are found to represent European values only, and to conflict with conceptualizations based on our own ideologies. That's important. And 3, accept nationalism, that is, cultural commitment, as a potentially positive, liberating, and constructive expression of human energy, depending on the specific content and the definition that it is given. So we must be nationalists. We must be African nationalists, and we need to define it we must define it Africanly, if that makes sense. And then the last paragraph, if we are mindful of these cultural facts, European self-interest expressed as universalism will become highly visible as an expression of European nationalism and cultural commitment, and will thereby lose its intellectual and ideological effectiveness. We will be able to recognize ourselves as victors, for it is now clear that the European universalism acts to fulfill the expansionist ultima rojo, energetic drive, as it serves the ideological function of the ultima wazo, cognitive structure, and the power needs of the asili, which is the cultural essence. Last 2 sentences. Rather than being understood then as the new non-partisan morality of an international order, we must interpret universalism in its European context in terms of the particularity of the European asili. It is the quintessential statement of European nationalism. End of chapter, actually. So yeah, nothing more to say on that, really. Brilliant end to the chapter there. What I'm pleased about, as we close, I'm pleased that now, as we are getting to the last few pages of this book, there's no surprises. She's laid the groundwork. She's made these points over and over again, and now it's very, very clear, hopefully to all of us, about what one of our main jobs is with regard to European thought. Is she lays out there, identify it, reject those elements of it which are expose universality and reject universality, critically analyze and reject those elements of so-called universalistic concepts that are actually European values, or values which are all about conflicting and conflict with our own ideologies, which obviously, if we're doing that, we have to then understand what are our own ideologies, which is where I want to start moving into some other books which are more positive in the sense of expressing our cultural ideologies. So we're going to do Kindezi next, and then I think we probably will do the Spirit of Intimacy by Sobonfu Some after that. Both of those very, very short books, and then I'd have to think about what book to do afterwards. Well, I'm going to do a solid run of books which are kind of more laying out an African-centered thought processes. And then third, we've got to be nationalistic, accept nationalism as accept nationalism as good, if it's defined in the ways that serve our interests. And yeah, that's it. Next week we're gonna do the conclusion. Now, thanks for the comments, guys. We out. Question is humanism a sort of universalism? I think so. I think if we think about what humanism is, depending on how you define humanism, I suppose, but when I think of humanism, I think of the idea that humans have a set of goals, a set of interests which are common to all of us, and thus in the way that we interact with people around us, and the way we operate on a political level, military level, and so forth in the real world, humanism is used as like to direct us away from focusing on our own racial interests, basically our own national interests, and focusing on the interests of humanity overall. So yeah, I would say that in that sense, humanism definitely is a form of universalism in this sense, whereby the interests of humanity overall are depicted, but what they actually are depicting is the interests of not human. Now, that's not to say that I do believe that we as people, or there are some common interests to we as people, absolutely, and actually, the easy way to identify that is to just look at the non-Western cultures and the original people cultures, first world cultures, which is what Mama Marimba Ani used, the term she uses quite a lot in the book. And just look, and you see the difference between their ideologies, their cultural principles and values and so forth, and those of the Western world. And you see a lot of commonality in those first world cultures. You see a lot of commonalities in their conceptions of the divine, their conceptions of what nature is, and the interaction between humans and nature and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? There's a lot of commonality there, but that gets hidden because, frankly, most first world cultures have not been great at promoting themselves in text form and video form and so forth. So we tend to think that what is presented to us by the Europeans as being humanism is humanism, but we, because they've got the technological dominance to be able to import their ideas and promote their ideas. So yeah, humanism is in that sense a sort of universalism, and everything's politics. Just chiming in on that, you said 100%. I've been to a Black humanism meeting, and they have a tendency to be apolitical. Yeah, I think that's a key thing, isn't it? You don't really think of humanism as something connected to political action. Probably, maybe. Humanism tends to be more of a I don't know. Anyway, it's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good point. Something worth investigating more. But yeah, there you go. So on that note, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Asanteni sana. If you say asanteni, the eni puts it into plural, which makes it clear that I'm talking to more than one person. Whereas asante will just be talk to one person. That's Kiswahili. So asanteni sana, everybody. Wote for joining us. Yeah, pacifist. Yeah, pacifist is kind of. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's when I think of humanism, it's kind of like a bit of a pacifistic thing for sure. But yes, asanteni sana. It's been a really good one. Once again, I'm glad I managed to do it as well, because I had a relative who surprised me with a visit today, and we've been out in the sun all afternoon, and I almost was like, oh, let's cancel this and just do it next week. But that's a terrible habit to get into. Keep cancelling. So I'm glad I did. I'm glad you guys joined. Apologies for last week again for missing that. I tried to make sure that doesn't happen again. But in the meantime, make sure that you like this video again. If you haven't already liked it, do make sure you subscribe as well. Subscriptions are still useful on YouTube because you will get notified of any future live streams. You can sign up as well on, where am I going? Yes, going that way. You can sign up there. That's probably something you can do now. Go to eliwananda.substack.com. and you will be able to join the email list and so on and so forth. But on that note, yeah, have a blessed rest of the time. I wish you peace. I wish you love, blessings, all that good stuff, and we'll see you next week. All right, peace. Asante, asante, sana, asante. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. All right. Salama, kwaherini.